This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in the nation's capital. We are coming on the air with breaking news. As you can see, Donald Trump arriving right now at the Fulton County Jail to surrender on charges related to his attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election loss in Georgia. Trump will be fingerprinted and a mugshot will be taken. We should note that so far, 11 of Trump's co-defendants have turned themselves in to be processed, including Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, and John Eastman. The county sheriff's office said they are being treated just like anyone else that appears at this jail, although most people don't arrive in a multi-car motorcade like we're seeing there with Donald Trump. The former president was indicted 10 days ago on 13 felony counts, including conspiracy and racketeering, a charge that is often used to target members of the mob. Now, earlier this week, Trump's lawyers agreed to a $200,000 bond that prevents him from speaking with or making any direct or indirect threats to any co-defendants or witnesses in the case. We should note this is Trump's fourth criminal indictment in less than 5 months. Those are pictures from inside the motorcade there as he arrives at the jail. And CBS News correspondent Nicole Killian is outside the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. So, Nicole, what happens once he's inside?
Yeah, well, first, Nora, I just want to let you know that this entrance right behind me is where the former president entered just moments ago, and we expect this process of him being booked to take less than an hour. As you mentioned, he will have to go through the same process as any other criminal defendant, be fingerprinted, get his height and weight taken, and his mugshot, which is something that we haven't seen before in other cases. Now, in addition to the security presence that you're probably seeing around me, on the other side of the jail, you have a number of protesters and demonstrators who have gathered to express their support for the former president, including Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who told reporters a short time ago she's in touch with the president and she's very angry about what's happening right now. And that really is the sentiment that we heard from a lot of the demonstrators, some of them telling me that they feel this entire experience is demeaning for the former president, that they believe that he didn't do anything wrong, but at the same time they feel that his surrender today could embolden him politically. But as you mentioned, this really is a surreal moment, I would say, in U.S. political history. I have covered this president on the campaign trail, at the White House, and now turning himself in tonight at the Fulton County Jail.
Nicole Killian, thank you. And as Nicole points out, former President Donald Trump already holds the ignominious distinction of being the first former president ever to face criminal charges. Tonight, even though this is the fourth indictment, we will have a mugshot for the first time. I want to bring in Robert Costa. And Robert, I understand you have some new reporting. We learned just before this appearance, Donald Trump shaking up his legal team.
Good to be with you, Nora. This is a bracing moment for American democracy to see a former president arrive at jail in Georgia in a battleground state, all while being the Republican frontrunner. Just a day after a debate he skipped. I just got back from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Trump is not only shaking up his campaign in terms of skipping the debate and trying to hold on to his position, but he's been shaking up his legal team. Drew Finling, who was his longtime lawyer in Georgia, worked on this agreement about how he was going to handle bond. He's now out. Trump has brought in a new lawyer, Stephen Sadow, a veteran criminal lawyer, to deal with the legal issues in Georgia. And this is complicated. This is RICO-style prosecution, as you said in your introduction. And that means it's a sprawling case. And we have the whole cast of characters from that post-election period in 2020. It's almost by the hour. A new mugshot seems to emerge, and later tonight, perhaps one of former President Trump.
I want to bring in our CBS News legal analyst, Ricky Kleeman, on this very matter, because I know, Ricky, you know the former president's new lawyer very well. Tell us about Stephen Sadow. What's his expertise? What do you think his legal strategy will be?
I've known Stephen Sadow for decades. I have tried cases with him, cases that were complex conspiracy cases that lasted many months. So he is someone who we would say is a man who understands and knows the law. He's the person that you turn to when you want to know about the legal definition of something. He's a person you turn to when you want to know the rules of evidence or the rules of procedure. He has an extraordinary memory. In court, he can cite a case to a judge off the top of his head for precisely the principle that it represents. He also has an interesting aura, Nora. He is quiet. When he comes in, he'll take his position, and when he speaks, believe me, you turn and listen. In terms of strategy, he is also aggressive. He is someone who knows how to file motions. He knows how to argue them. So I think that we will find, just as we might have found with Drew Finley, a very aggressive motion practice, particularly dealing with motions to dismiss this RICO indictment, as well as the other charges.
Ricky, I have to ask you, because Donald Trump has been turned down by a number of high-profile attorneys. Why do you think Stephen would want to be involved in this case?
I think Steve Sadow is a true believer. I think he believes that every person accused is entitled to the best defense. I don't think that this is political for him in any way. In fact, I don't even know Steve's politics, but I would not guess that they are in favor of Donald Trump. But he is not someone who goes out and exposes his own personal views. He likes being a trial lawyer. He wanted to be a trial lawyer from the time he was a young man, even a boy, and he likes the idea of combat. And this is a perfect case to be able to go into the courtroom and show that his strategy, his tactics can rule.
Ricky Kleeman, thank you. Want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. And, you know, you look at the consent bond order, $200,000, these 13 charges, multiple criminal conspiracy charges, filing false documents, false statements, and, of course, that violation of the RICO Act. So some very serious charges. At the same time, an incredible moment in American history.
It is an incredible moment that is obvious, and we can't underscore it enough. This has been a summer of indictments for the United States of a former president, each of them historic in its own right. But if I could borrow or maybe paraphrase George Orwell from his 1947 novella, Animal Farm, some indictments are more equal than others. I think this one is more significant for the future of this constitutional republic. Why? Because what are the issues involved? And who is the aggrieved party? The aggrieved party is the state of Georgia. Under the Constitution, ratified in 1789, Article 1 and Article 2 specify states are in control of time, manner, and place of elections. And electors that elect presidents are defined in Article 2 of the Constitution. Everything about that process is a state interest. Georgia is the state that is bringing this case. Yes, through a county attorney, but it's the laws of Georgia and how it administers its election that is the violated party here. So this case is going to turn on states and their relationship to conducting their elections, and is there a federal presidential interest in interfering or trying to overturn what a state has done in terms of an election? Georgia is arguing forcefully, no, it's not. And the conduct of the former president violated that state's rights to conduct its election in its way under the Constitution. That's what's at stake. That's enormously large for not only Donald Trump, all the other implicated defendants, but the furtherance of this great political experiment known as the Constitutional Republic of the United States.
You're looking now at live pictures of the Fulton County Jail. This is a notorious jail, or actually it's under Department of Justice investigation. 7 inmates have died this year there, so it is a tough place. And the former president inside now, being booked, being fingerprinted, likely a mugshot taken, and as was noted, he is going to have his height and weight recorded, being treated just like anyone else who goes inside that jail, and that is where he is now. Also want to bring in Scott McFarland, who is with us, who has covered all of these legal issues so closely. Walk us through some of these counts.
There are 19 criminal defendants in one case. That's just striking fundamentally. And they're charged with racketeering, which is in itself a crime that has enormous breadth and scope. The image that's jumping out at me is the one we're not seeing, Nora. We don't see Donald Trump walking into the jail. The traveling press pool didn't capture that image. They were kept a distance away, just like when he entered the Washington, D.C. federal jail earlier this month. He's still able to control some of the optics. Didn't have that image shared with America. There are 7 others who've still yet to surrender themselves in this case. They have until 12 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow to do so. And the biggest name on that list is a name we've heard so much since the 2020 election, Jeffrey Clark, the former Trump administration Justice Department official who in the 11th hour, the final days of the administration, allegedly sought to overturn the election results and seize control of the Department of Justice. I mentioned his name in particular, Nora, because he's going to challenge, much like former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is, to move this case from Fulton County to federal court. The judge has just set a hearing for Jeffrey Clark for September 18th on that matter, but he still has to surrender. And Nora, if they were to succeed to move this case to federal court, a couple things change. The projected jury pool goes from just Fulton County to all of the Northern District of Georgia, and it takes the cameras out of the courtroom if this were ever to go to trial.
So that's a very important distinction, because as it stands now, the press has been granted the right to have cameras in the courtroom. That would change the dynamic greatly.
Federal courts prohibit cameras universally. That's why there will not be one in Washington, D.C., nor will there be one in Fort Pierce, Florida. If they're able to shift this to federal court, the same is true in Georgia. Mark Meadows makes the same argument Monday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, to move this case to federal court. If there's any inkling that's going to succeed, it's quite likely former President Trump will try to make the same shift.
It's an important question, and I'll defer to Ricky because she's the legal expert here, but I've read the district attorney's response to this, saying nothing that has been alleged is part of the ordinary carrying out of duties of a chief of staff or a president. They're outside of those bounds. Therefore, they are state crimes, and therefore the jurisdiction should hold. But again, I defer to Ricky. But the response from the district attorney is very forceful on the points of law and conduct.
The former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, surrendering earlier. We have his mugshot from earlier today. Striking to see the former White House chief of staff in a mugshot. And of course, just yesterday, Rudy Giuliani, which of course, that mugshot of him, America's mayor, who led New York City with distinction after 9/11, and then has been embroiled in these legal matters since representing and giving advice to Donald Trump, a fall from grace that has cost him greatly, not only personally, but financially as well.
Who, before becoming mayor, earned a reputation as an aggressive prosecutor, prosecuting, among other things, RICO cases in the Southern District of New York, where in some cases, lawyers were also prosecuted by Rudy Giuliani.
He appeared before cameras yesterday in New York City outside his apartment before heading down to Georgia. And I don't know about you guys, but he seemed upset. He seemed really moved by what he was facing, and I sensed a different tone from him than I've ever sensed before. The weight of this, when you have a mugshot taken being fingerprinted after spending most of your life prosecuting criminals, particularly personal for Rudy Giuliani.
I think about that line from the film All the President's Men, when Deep Throat's in the garage with Woodward, Robert Redford's character, and said things got a little bit out of hand with All the President's Men, with Watergate. And with Georgia, it's important to step back and ask yourself, well, why are we watching all this right now? What is going on with Georgia years after the 2020 election? What happened? Well, here's what happened, and briefly as possible. After 2020, and Trump is defeated by then President-elect Biden in November 2020, Trump goes to Giuliani, and he says, my campaign lawyers are not giving me any good answers. I need answers that I can stay in office. And Giuliani says, well, let's fight it in the courts. So they do that throughout November 2020. They fail. Then in December 2020, Trump and Giuliani huddle with a few others, including Sidney Powell, who's one of the indicted people in this RICO case, an outside conservative lawyer, among others. And they say, well, we can't win with the court, so what are we going to do? And they come up with a scheme to pressure states to send alternate electors. And during the course of my reporting with Bob Woodward, we discovered a memo authored by John Eastman, who also has a mugshot, also indicted in this RICO case, which said to Trump, if you lean on states, somehow they can, with special sessions, irregular legislative sessions, or even just pressuring with activists, they can create these new slates of electors. And they really focused on Georgia because they believed Georgia was a ruby red state that was primed to do what Trump wanted. I always think about Trump's rally on the night of January 4th, 2021. Trump goes to Georgia famously or infamously, depending on whom you ask, and he says, Mike Pence, you better do what I want on January 6th, and the whole crowd in Georgia goes wild. Everybody's down in Georgia saying Georgia's going to be the state that puts it over the line for Trump on January 6th. The lieutenant governor of Georgia now Burt Jones, was in Washington on January 5th to meet with Vice President Pence, just to say hello, to say maybe you should think about changing your mind on January 6th. So Georgia became this cauldron of activity. Everybody was going there to ask the governor, Brian Kemp, to have a special session and to send those alternate electors. But ultimately, they didn't, and Kemp remains a foe of Trump. And now Georgia is this microcosm of the broader story we've been covering for a long time of January 6th and American democracy.
That state decided by less than 12,000 votes.
And there's an intervening event there in Bob's beautiful narrative. The special election is conducted for 2 Senate races. Both go to Democrats. Every Republican you talk to in Georgia now will tell you if Trump and his allies weren't so obsessively focused on the 2020 election, but put in for those races, those might have been won by the Republicans. There wouldn't have been a governing, though narrow, majority for Biden in the Senate, and much of the things that Biden has gotten through would not have happened. That was a crucial 72 hours, not only in the history of Georgia politics, but the ramifications for Congress and the Biden administration and former President Trump. And in the primaries recently, there was a referendum on Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger. They both won their primaries. So if Republicans in Georgia were aggrieved by all of these things that Trump talked about, they would have cast their ballots differently. They didn't.
We are just learning that Donald Trump has been booked, according to Fulton County Jail records, a number attached to that. And of course, what's looming is whether there'll be a mugshot of the former president, that it will be seen around the world, Robert.
And you said Rudy Giuliani's tone has changed, but this is a grim story for those beyond those in power. Ruby Freeman and others, they have said they were maligned by Giuliani and Trump during that period.
Well, our coverage will continue on CBS News, streaming your local news. And for some of you, we'll have a full wrap-up tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.